Thanks for joining us today for our webinar, wherever you may be located. If it's morning, good morning. If it's afternoon, good afternoon. We're going to be talking about reducing risk in your file shares, and it's a topic that our clients have been bringing up a lot lately and trying to get to the bottom of, get some ideas on how to tackle this. And I think it stems from the fact that the idea of being able to move all of your content from your file shares into a content management system can be overwhelming, especially for larger organizations. And it may be a goal down the road, but it's not something that may be happening in the short term. But at the same time, we recognize that there's some inherent risk with the way files are being stored and what files are being stored on the file shares. So that's what we're going to talk to today. I put up a slide just to set the tone for the discussion, so feel free to take a second and review that. I think there's no end to the Gilbert comic strips that could be applied here, but I thought this one was a particularly good one. All right, let's get going. A little bit about Parent Corporation as we get started. Parent Corporation is a company that focuses on file cleanup, classification, tagging, and migration. So looking at all of the files that typically fit in file shares or SharePoint, old SharePoint sites, or maybe an old DMS system. And they may not be in the structure that we want. There may be a lot of outdated content or duplicate content, and we really need to sift through all of that, find what is good and valid to bring forward, put it into a new structure, and migrate that into a new system. And as a company, that's what we do. We were established in 2000, so we've been around for about 14 years. We've developed our own software suite to do this. So while we are a services company providing services to organizations, we do have a software suite that we've developed that helps with the deduplication and the indexing and the mapping and categorization, all of that goes into sorting out what this content is. But more importantly, we've really built around that a level of expertise. So seeing as we're not a product company, we're a service company, we really have a wrapper around what we do in terms of expertise with our personnel, and we can really walk you through a project from start to finish, depending on what your goals are. And again, specifically, traditionally, we talk a lot about migration to an enterprise content management system. We're going to take a slightly different spin on some of that conversation today. So as I mentioned, a lot of our clients have come to us with this question of what is in our shared network drives or our file shares, and what sort of concerns should we be having. So obviously, when we think about the source of the content that's coming in and being stored there, really files are coming from anywhere and everywhere. So internal, someone's creating a draft of the document, they're circulating it, they're storing different copies of it. Content's coming in from clients, it's coming in from partners, and a lot of it is business related, some of it's not business related, some of it's research on our competitors, and certainly some of it is contract, might be intellectual property and development. So there's really, that is the crux of the problem, is this intermingling of these different sources of content. In terms of the types of documents that we have, again, it's anything and everything that's being stored on those file shares. So everything from CAD files, if it's an engineering group, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, you name it. We also find there's a lot of video content, multimedia content tends to be stuck up on the drives as well, especially because as we create more multimedia content in organizations that haven't selected a specific tool or vendor for that type of content, that those files just get stashed up on the file share or the shared drive. Over the years, we realized that while most organizations are getting business done with the current state of their file shares or the current state of folder organization within their file shares, from the outside looking in, it certainly looks like things are less than optimal. So we find that the foldering, the naming conventions they vary across the organization. So things like date formats, acronyms, abbreviations aren't consistent. And there's certainly a lot of duplication in terms of the structure. So pockets within pockets that have been duplicated. So that makes it really tricky when we're trying to identify what types of content we have. The structure that it's sitting in certainly doesn't help us. And the technology itself doesn't really help us. So with the file shares, we're really talking about folders. It's really flat. There's obviously very little metadata available. And the technology, there's nothing there to help us search and sort and effectively find the information that we're looking for. So that is the challenge that most of our clients are up against, and what we're really looking to do is identify those files that are of particular risk to the organization, and what can we do with those. Most commonly, we're looking for things like intellectual property documents. So what's being exposed on the shared drive that is really inherent to the business and the success of the business moving forward in terms of secrecy required around that information. But then there's also things like financial information, budgeting information, health information of employees, or personal information often can be exposed. And while those they represent a different type of risk. Certainly a risk to the organization, but a different type of risk now, because now we're exposing an individual's information to potentially other individuals that shouldn't have access to that. And then client-specific information can be exposed as well. And there are certainly organizations where that is not a good thing, where client information should be locked down and not shared even within the organization between different business areas. There's some real compliance and regulations that we're lining up against here. So depending on what industry you're in, that's going to drive out, if there are really specific concerns. Health information tends to be a big one. Personal information, obviously, as well, in terms of what's out there and why we want to lock it down. But for just a general business, and it applies to most, if not all, organizations, it's really around your competitiveness. So is there information leaving the organization that is impacting your ability to be competitive, your ability to close on a contract if something got leaked out, the ability for your competitors to be able to act on something. And the realization, I think, is there that information does get leaked, whether it's intentional or unintentional. Unintentional, there's oodles of ways in which information can leave the organization unintentionally, and usually it's by well-meaning employees that are just trying to do their jobs, but based on the infrastructure that they're using, the technology they're using, their devices, information can be exposed. Parent Corporation has been working in this area for quite a while, and a number of years ago we started polling individuals or organizations that we speak with about where their content sits and what percentage of their content is actually in an enterprise content management system or a document management system and is properly or effectively locked down, with the security model in place. And we found over the years that has come to about 16% on average for an organization. Only 16% of their content is actually in an enterprise content management system. with the bulk of that, the biggest pool of that remaining content being sitting back on the file shares. So a tremendous amount of files. In most organizations, we're talking millions, tens of millions, and in some cases, hundreds of millions of files sitting on file shares. The challenge that we run into with file shares tends to be the security system that has been applied to them is difficult to understand. So often there is a very complex security system in place or access controls built onto the folders, but it's very difficult to understand what they are. They're often have been built up over years and years. Sometimes things are effectively locked down, but a lot of times things aren't. So I would say that's a real big gap in terms of being able to control this information, is the ability to be able to identify what it is and lock it down effectively. So if we consider that there's likely content on the file share that we don't want there, it may be sensitive for any number of reasons. It might be, again, it might be financial, it might be intellectual property, it could be someone's personal or health information that is sitting on the shared drive. And we marry that with the fact that the security system isn't necessarily robust enough to control access to those files or ensure that we're controlling access to just who's required to see them. Then we have to assume that files are leaving the organization and that they're leaving all the time, whenever they want. And you see this, I'm sure, within your organization. Memory sticks are commonly used to be able to copy information quickly and run it between one system or another, or to a different location. A laptop, information is stored and then taken off of premise, and access to it is somewhat lost as we do that. And commonly, folks mail content around through email as well. So if I want to work on something while I'm at a different location, or I'm at a cottage or on a vacation, I might email it to a Gmail account or something. So we need to be cognizant of the fact that these files are leaving all of the time when they're in this environment of the file shares and when we're not locking them down. So the fact that they're leaving and they're not locked down, we have to assume that some of the files that we really are concerned about are getting out beyond our control, beyond the network itself. I forgot to mention, so with GoToMeeting, there's a sidebar probably on the left-hand side of your screen. If you have any questions or comments as we go through the presentation, feel free to add them in there, and I will pop back in from time to time and just see if there's anything sitting there for us to pick up on. So feel free to add those as we go. So when we talk about cleaning this up and controlling the risk, we've really come down to two different approaches. One is go through the file shares and just look for those areas that you're concerned about. Do a lighter path and peel off those highest risk areas and decide how you're going to manage them, what you're going to do about it. And a more comprehensive approach would be to actually go through, clean everything, organize it, and migrate it to another system. Some organizations are laser focused on shutting down the shared drives that we speak with, shutting them down and getting everybody onto an enterprise content management system or a DMS. And other organizations say that's just not going to work. Never going to work for us because we always have these off cases where we need that loose type of file management. And that's okay, but we need to ensure that we know what those files are and that they're being secured appropriately. So let's talk about an approach to dealing with the scenarios that we've come up with. So in our practice, as I mentioned, we have a service practice around cleaning and classifying files. Commonly, what we would do is we would do a capture of the existing file share with our software, and we would point our software at it and essentially index content. so we know what we're up against. Let the software learn about the contents of those files. And then through some business analysis, we would understand what is of particular importance, of particular sensitivity to your organization. So things like financial information, are there industry-specific regulations that you need to be concerned about? Is it health, personal? What are all of these things that we want to be looking for? And then from there, for each one of those categories, we build out a list of keywords to help us identify what that content might be. Okay, so we might take a list of clients if we're concerned about securing the client information and moving it into, let's say, an ECM system or a client project management or client type management system. We can take a list of client names, run it against the content, and any document that bubbles up with a hit on a client name, we're going to be able to peel off and say, okay. Very similarly, we can go through other aspects such as, financial. So if we're looking to ensure that our financial information is secured and not just loose out there, we might take keywords such as, annual reports and budgeting and things like that, and search the content, and then pull back a group of files that have hits for those, and then determine what we want to do with that content. And on down the line. So health, we might be looking for, group numbers for the plan or some other sort of identifier around insurance information, personal information. Certainly we'd want to search for social security numbers or other sorts of identifiers, credit card numbers, if there's anything like that sitting out there. Of course, we want to be able to identify that and peel that off. So I guess one way to think about this is we don't need to decide how we're going to handle, how we're going to process 50 million files. Let's say there's 50 million files on your file share. We don't need to decide how we're going to handle every file right now in order to identify some of these risk areas. We can just run against that pool of content, the keywords of the different risk areas that we've identified, and then cluster those together and make some sort of decision on what we're going to do with them. And some of those decision points tend to be around, we might migrate it through to a document management or an enterprise content management system. That's a fairly, that's a really good approach for content that we know we want to manage long-term in that system, get it off of the file shares altogether. For content that, for whatever reason, does not belong in the ECM system, we might move it to a lockdown section of the file share. So if we bubble up and we find that there's a bunch of health information that was exposed, it should belong in a subdirectory of the HR group, locked down where only a couple of folks have access to it, then we'll do that. So we can actually action on that and move those files around. Some content may just stay there. So we might look at it and say, yes, that hits on some of these keywords, but there's nothing in there that's of particular concern. Let's just leave it as is. And then there might be content that we just decide to delete. So as we're doing this, we can do things like deduplication, or we could identify files that are out of date based on the content of the file. So the old client information that we no longer should be keeping, the client that has no longer been with the organization for a number of years, and as part of their agreement said, once our working relationship is done, you need to delete all our content. Those relationships or those agreements certainly do exist, and that's the type of thing that we could segregate for deletion just based on now we know what it is and how it should be handled. So we can really work with your organization to help surface what these risk areas are. I'm certain that you know what the big ones are that are a concern for your organization, but then build out below that both what are the keywords that are going to get us to some analysis so that we can surface that content quickly using technology, and then what are the decision points that are going to be made in terms of where that content should go and how it should be managed long term. I'm just going to stop for a second and check the questions panel to see if there's anything. I don't see anything popping in, so I'm going to continue on with the presentation. So how we actually do this, for those of you who are familiar with PARAM, you'll know that a key part of what we do and the way we deliver our projects revolves around our parallel portal, and that's really our client's view into our classification environment. So our software has a couple of levels to it, one in which our folks our classification experts are in applying the keywords and segregating content based on its meaning using our software. And then a lighter version of our software is available via the web where you can log in and make some sort of determination in terms of how this segregation has gone. And this screenshot just provides an idea of what this might look like from an organization, with having the legacy shared drive on the left-hand side of the screen and the target structure. In this case, it's a structure, but the structure really represents your risk areas on the right-hand side of the screen. And then take a look at, we're identifying, in this case, client files that we want to know more about and determine how we're going to secure them. What the portal does, it allows you to see the link between where it came from and how it was identified. So we can identify something, in this case, as a client file. We can identify the author, and then we can also apply additional metadata in terms of how that content should be managed. So what do we want to do with it? Do we want to migrate it somewhere? Do we want to exercise a disposition process on that content? So from our perspective, the portal really helps streamline your review of all of the analysis work that goes into this. Again, because there are potentially large volumes of files to be processed, and we really need to streamline, okay, what are the buckets that the files are going to go into? What are the actions that are going to be taken, and who do we want to weigh in on that from the client side? Because we don't necessarily want users from all different business areas weighing in on this type of thing. We're probably going to want a tighter group that's more central to the risk management and records management side of things, that are going to weigh in on how different types of records, once they've been identified as a high-risk area, how those particular records are going to be handled and processed long term. How we actually do this as a service, as I mentioned, PARAM Corporation, we bring this technology to the table. We bring information governance guidance to the table as well, so helping you understand if we're going to run indexing against your content and surface things that may be of risk. How do your records management policies apply here? How do we map that against your enterprise content management system? So we bring a general understanding of information governance and records management issues to the project. We also bring a real project process, so we do this type of work consistently, so we can lay out a project that's very streamlined and easy to follow what the steps are, so that you know on your side what kind of effort and decisions are required to be made as we're processing a large volume of content. And then there's potentially the last part of what we do is potentially around change management, and that's if we're going to identify files that have been exposed at one point in the file share and move them either to a lockdown area of the file share. Again, if we use that HR example where we're going to take some files that have been traditionally available more readily and lock them down within a subset in HR, some folks are going to need to know where they went. And our tools can provide that kind of change management to show them what moves have taken place. Another example of that would be if we actually took content from the file shares and moved it into an enterprise content management system or SharePoint or something like that. Our tools can actually show what moved where. So whenever we're moving content around, we have this legacy, this map that stays behind for a while and shows people what happened and why, so that they can follow this. Because whenever we go into a file share and we start making large moves of content, it can certainly cause a lot of pain within the organization to try to follow what's happened, where's the content now, how do I access it. So we certainly bring that part of things to the table as well. Let me see, I think we're coming up on time. I'll check one more time for questions before we wrap, see if there's anything there. All right, I'm not seeing anything. If there is a question, feel free. You could enter it now or feel free to get in touch afterwards. I'd be glad to continue the discussion. And again, just keep in mind, it's really a blend of getting to the bottom of this is really a blend of technology. Technology plays a big role, obviously, in doing the indexing behind the scenes so that we can surface the content, but there's also a large role of a business analysis role to understand what are the particular areas of risk that you're interested in and how can we feed the technology keywords or terms that are going to allow us to surface that type of content out of the large pool of files that are sitting in your file shares. I appreciate everyone's time. I don't see anything coming into the questions panel, so I think we'll wrap it up there. Again, if you'd like to continue the conversation, feel free to let us know, and the folks at Param here would be glad to do so. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day.